The stale air of the High Synod tasted of recycled ozone and the bitter copper of dying machinery, a sensory reminder that the end was not merely a theoretical calculation, but a physical creeping reality. High Archon Thalker sat upon the obsidian throne, his chitinous plating dull and graying with age, his four primary eyes fixed on the holographic projection that dominated the center of the vast, circular chamber. The projection, once a vibrant sphere of the homeworld's stellar neighborhood, now flickered with the jagged, static-laden artifacts of failing processors. Around him, the tiered benches of the Synod were filled with the silent, brooding forms of the Xalanthi leadership, their sensory tendrils twitching in the nervous rhythm of a species that had spent 300 cycles waiting for a call that never came. The silence in the chamber was heavy, pressing down on them with the weight of the orbital suppression field that had locked their civilization in this decaying system, a quarantine enforced by the very masters who had promised them eternal protection. They were the abandoned, the forgotten, the debris left in the wake of the great galactic withdrawal, and the psychological toll of that abandonment had etched itself into every line of Thalker's weathered carapace. He watched the projection of the outer marker buoys, the silent sentinels that marked the boundary of their prison, and felt the familiar crushing weight of despair. "The atmospheric scrubbers in Sector 7 have failed, Archon," said Sub-Minister Vex, breaking the silence with a voice that sounded like grinding stones. Vex did not look up from his data slate, his posture slumped in resignation. "Engineering reports that we do not have the rare Earth isotopes required to synthesize new filter membranes. The air in the lower hab blocks will become toxic within 2 planetary rotations. We must initiate protocol silence." Protocol silence, the euphemism for state-sanctioned euthanasia. Thalker closed his eyes, his internal hearts beating a slow, mournful rhythm. It was the 3rd time this month they had been forced to consider culling a population sector to save the rest. The resources of the Xalanthi homeworld, Xylos, were exhausted. The great orbital shipyards, once the pride of their industrial might, were now skeletal husks drifting in the void, stripped of metal to repair the failing life-support domes on the surface. They had been left behind by the Celestial Imperium, their patrons, their gods, who had departed the sector centuries ago with a vague promise of return, locking the hyperspace gates behind them. The Xalanthi had waited, they had prayed, they had rationed, and now they were dying in the dark. "We will not initiate protocol silence," Thalker said, his voice low but carrying a resonance that vibrated through the metal of the throne. "Not yet. We will divert power from the palace shields. We will strip the copper from the decorative statues in the Hall of Ancestors. We will keep Sector 7 breathing for another week." General Kale, the commander of the Planetary Defense Force, a force with nothing to defend and no fuel to fly their interceptors, stood up, his armor rattling. "Respectfully, Archon, this is madness. We are cannibalizing our history to delay the inevitable by mere days. The Imperium is not coming back. The gates are sealed. The sensors show nothing but the background radiation of the void. We are ghosts haunting a grave. We should die with dignity, not scratching at the walls for a few more breaths of foul air." "Dignity?" Thalker snapped, his eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce light. "There is no dignity in surrender, General. We were entrusted with the stewardship of this system. We were told to hold. We hold until the last heart stops. That is the Xylanthi way." "The Xylanthi way was servitude to masters who discarded us like broken tools," Kale roared, his frustration boiling over, echoing off the high vaulted ceiling of the chamber. "Look at the sensors, Thalker. Look at the deep-range scans. There is nothing out there. The galaxy has moved on. We are alone in a pocket of dead space. To deny this is not courage, it is delusion." The chamber erupted into low murmurs, the sound of fear finding a voice. The Synod was dividing, the tension that had been building for decades finally fracturing the fragile unity of the leadership. Some nodded with Kale, their spirits broken. Others looked to Thalker with desperate hope. The argument was a familiar dance, a ritual of grief that they performed as the lights dimmed and the air grew thinner. Thalker prepared to respond, to offer some platitude about duty and endurance, when the ground beneath them trembled. It was not the rhythmic shaking of a tectonic shift, nor the mechanical vibration of a failing generator. It was a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly in the marrow of their bones. The holographic projector in the center of the room fizzled and died, then rebooted with a violent burst of red light. The automated warning sirens, silent for a generation, began to wail, a mournful, dissonant sound that froze the blood of every Xylanth in the hall. General Kale was the first to react, his warrior instincts overriding his despair. He vaulted over the bench, landing before the master console, his claws flying over the tactile interface. "Report," Thalker commanded, rising from the throne, his age forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. "Gravimetric shear detected," Cale barked, his voice tight with disbelief. "Massive. It is not a natural phenomenon, it is a tear. Someone is breaching the hyperspace quarantine field. They are forcing an aperture through the interference zone." "The Imperium," Vex whispered, hope making his voice tremble. "Have they returned?" Cale stared at the readings, his mandibles flaring in confusion and terror. "No, the energy signature is wrong. It is crude, violent. It lacks the harmonic resonance of Imperial drives. This is brute force physics. Whoever is doing this is not sliding through subspace, they are tearing it open." The thrumming intensified, shaking dust from the ancient frescoes on the ceiling. The entire planet seemed to groan. On the main view screen, which displayed the starfield above Xylos, a point of darkness began to expand. It was not black. It was a void of color, a distortion where the light of the stars was being bent and swallowed. Then, with a flash that blinded the sensors and forced the Synod members to shield their eyes, the tear ruptured. Reality snapped back into place, with a thunderclap that was detected by atmospheric sensors across the globe. From the tear, they emerged. They did not come as the Imperium had, in sleek teardrop vessels of silver and white light. These ships were mountains of gray metal, blocky and utilitarian, scarred by cosmic dust and micrometeoroids. They were ugly, brutal things, bristling with antennas, radiator fins, and the menacing barrels of kinetic cannons. They did not glide. They burned, their engines vomiting plumes of blue-white plasma that cut scars across the darkness. They were immense. The lead vessel alone was larger than the greatest city remaining on Xylos, and they were not alone. Behind the lead vessel came another, and another, a procession of iron giants filling the sky, blotting out the indifferent stars. "Invasion," Cale breathed, the word falling like a stone into the silence. "They have come to finish what the starvation started." Thalker watched the screen, mesmerized by the sheer industrial violence of the fleet. "No," he said softly. "Invaders do not announce themselves with such noise. Invaders strike. These are parking." "They are hailing us," the communications officer cried out from the lower pit, her voice cracking. "Broadband transmission. It is overwhelming our receivers. They are broadcasting on every frequency, military, civilian, emergency, even the old analog bands." "Put it through," Thalker ordered, gripping the arms of his throne. "Let us hear the voice of our executioners." The static cleared, replaced by a voice. It was not the melodious, multitonal singing of the Imperium, nor the clicking, chittering speech of the Xylanthi. It was a flat, guttural sound, heavy with lower frequencies, speaking a language that the universal translators struggled to parse for a moment before locking onto a syntax matrix. "This is Admiral Vance of the United Terran Coalition Heavy Fleet Endurance," the voice boomed, echoing through the chamber with a clarity that was startling. "We are responding to a distress beacon designated Gamma 94. We are reading critical atmospheric degradation and signs of civilization collapse. We are not hostile. I repeat, we are not hostile. We are requesting immediate permission to establish orbital synchronicity and deploy assistance teams. Please respond." Silence reigned in the Synod. The Xylanthi looked at one another, the translation of the alien words bouncing around their minds. "Terran Coalition, assistance teams." "It is a trick," Cale hissed. "They want us to lower the planetary shields so they can bombard the surface." "We have no shields, Cale," Thalker reminded him gently. "If they wanted to bombard us, we would already be ash. They are asking permission. The Imperium never asked. They commanded." Thalker stepped down from the dais, walking toward the communications station. "Open the channel, audio only." The channel chirped open. Thalker took a breath of the stale air, steadying his hearts. "This is High Archon Thalker of the Xylanthi Dominion. You have entered a quarantined sector, designated as forbidden by the Celestial Imperium. Your presence is unexpected. Identify your intent." There was a pause, a moment of silence from the iron fleet above. Then the voice returned, softer this time, less declamatory. "Archon Thalker, we are aware of the quarantine markers. We ignored them. We picked up a faint, repeating signal on an old frequency, a cry for help that had been bouncing off a nebula for 100 years. We tracked it here. We are not the Imperium. We are humanity, and we do not leave sentience to die in the dark. We are sending a shuttle down. Please do not fire." The transmission cut. Thalker looked at the screen, at the massive ships that hung in the sky like protective monoliths. For the first time in 3 centuries, the crushing weight in his chest lightened, replaced by a terrified, fragile hope. "Let them come," Thalker whispered. The arrival of the human delegation was an event that would be etched into Xalanthi history, not for its pomp, but for its stark contrast to the divine arrival of the Imperium eons ago. When the Imperium had landed, they had descended in beams of light, clad in robes of energy, floating above the ground. The humans came in a dropship that roared and shuddered, its hull scorched from re-entry, landing with a heavy mechanical thud on the cracked landing pad of the palace. Steam hissed from cooling vents, and a ramp slammed down onto the concrete. Thalker stood at the head of the greeting party, surrounded by his guards who held their ceremonial and largely functionless plasma pikes. He expected giants. He expected monsters. What walked down the ramp were bipedal creatures, shorter than the average Xylanth, encased in bulky white and blue environmental suits. They walked with a heavy, purposeful gait. There were no flowing robes, no aura of superiority. They carried crates. The leader of the humans removed his helmet as he approached. His face was soft, pinkish beige, covered in a coarse stubble of hair, his eyes small and forward-facing. He looked fragile, squishy. There was no exoskeleton to protect his internal organs, no claws to rend flesh. Yet there was a hardness in his eyes, a calculated intelligence that assessed the environment, the structural integrity of the palace, and the health of the Xalanthi with a single sweep. "Archon," the human said, offering a strange gesture with an open hand. "I am Admiral Vance. This is Lead Engineer Sato and Ambassador Kynes." Thalker bowed his head, a gesture of deep respect. "You are welcome to the Citadel of Ash, Admiral, though I fear we have little to offer in terms of hospitality. Our water is rationed, and our air is, as you can taste, failing." Vance took a deep breath, tasting the air, and grimaced. He looked at the engineer, Sato. "CO2 levels are through the roof. Scrubbers are shot." "Looks like it," Sato replied, tapping a wrist computer. "Partial pressure is lethal for them within 48 hours. We need to deploy the atmospheric condensers immediately. I can have the fleet drop the modular units in the upper atmosphere within the hour." Vance nodded. "Do it." He turned back to Thalker. "Archon, we didn't come for hospitality. We brought supplies. We have food synthesizers, medical bays, and raw materials. But first, we need to understand the situation. Why is this system under quarantine? The beacon said pathogen protocol. Are you infected?" Thalker straightened, his pride stinging. "We are not diseased, Admiral. The Imperium declared us obsolete. They calculated that our system's resource output no longer justified the expenditure of maintaining the hyperspace gate. The quarantine was not to keep a sickness in. It was to keep us from following them, to keep us from polluting their efficiency with our need." The human delegation went still. A ripple of something passed through them, not fear, but a cold, hard anger. It was a subtle shift, a tightening of jaws, a narrowing of eyes. "They locked you in," Ambassador Kynes said, her voice quiet and dangerous. "They locked you in to starve because you weren't profitable." "We were left behind," Thalker said simply. "It is the way of the galaxy. The strong ascend and the weak are discarded." Admiral Vance stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He looked up at the towering Xylanth Archon, and for a moment the size difference seemed to vanish. The human radiated a terrifying intensity. "That might be the way of your galaxy, Archon. It is not the way of ours. Where we come from, you don't leave people behind. Not ever." He tapped his comms unit. "Fleet, this is Vance. Condition green. The quarantine is a lie. Repeat, the quarantine is a bureaucratic execution order. Initiate full relief protocols. Drop the fabrication units. I want the engineering core on the ground ASAP. And get the Dauntless to tow a comm buoy to the edge of the system. We're tearing down the jamming field." Over the next few weeks, the Xalanthi watched in stunned disbelief as the humans went to work. They did not use magic. They did not use matter transmutation or psionic shaping. They used machines. Loud, grinding, beautiful machines. They dropped massive atmospheric processors that hung in the sky like clouds, sucking in the poison air and breathing out clean oxygen. They deployed swarms of drones that scurried over the hull of the planetary cities, welding, patching, and reinforcing. The humans themselves were a marvel of contradictions. They were physically weak, requiring sleep cycles and constant intake of water, yet they worked with a relentless, terrifying endurance. They seemed to thrive on difficulty. When a generator failed, they did not pray. They cursed, kicked it, and then stripped it apart and rebuilt it better than before. They were chaotic, loud, and emotional, yet their logic was razor-sharp. Thalker spent much of his time with Admiral Vance in the war room, which had been converted into a logistics center. He watched as the humans mapped the system, their sensors penetrating the nebulae and dust clouds that the Xylanthi had always feared. "You possess technology we have never seen," Thalker remarked one evening as they watched a team of human engineers repressurize a hydroponics bay. "Yet you do not act like gods. The Imperium demanded worship. You demand coffee." Vance chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "We aren't gods, Archon. We're just survivors. We almost destroyed ourselves a dozen times before we made it to the stars. We know what it's like to be on the brink. That's why we built the coalition. To make sure that when someone screams in the dark, someone else is listening." "Why?" Thalker asked, the question that had plagued him since the first ship appeared. "Why expend these resources? We have nothing to trade. Our world is dead rock. Our culture is a memory. What do you gain?" Vance looked at the holographic map of the galaxy. "We don't do it for profit. We do it because the universe is a cold, indifferent place. It doesn't care if you live or die. The only warmth in the void is the warmth we bring with us. If we turn our backs on you, we lose a piece of ourselves. Besides," Vance's expression darkened, "we have a history with the Celestial Imperium. We've seen their efficiency before. We don't like bullies." The cultural exchange was not without friction. General Kale and the military caste found the humans' lack of martial hierarchy confusing. The human soldiers treated their officers with casual familiarity, yet obeyed orders with instant, suicidal bravery. The Xylanthi scholars were baffled by human philosophy, which seemed to oscillate between extreme nihilism and boundless optimism. But the bond formed in the crucible of shared labor. The Xylanthi learned to repair human circuits. The humans learned to navigate the complex, tonal language of the Xylanthi. Then came the discovery. It happened in the third month of the relief effort. The human survey ship Pathfinder, scanning the outer asteroid belt of the system, the graveyard where the Xylanthi believed the spirits of the dead lingered, found an anomaly. Thalker was summoned to the command deck of the Endurance. The sheer scale of the human ship was overwhelming, a city of steel corridors and bustling crew members. He stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars, feeling the hum of the massive reactor beneath his feet. "We found something," Vance said, his voice grim. "We thought the quarantine was just about resources. We were wrong. The Imperium didn't just leave you to die because you were expensive. They left you here as bait." Thalker felt a chill run through his carapace. "Bait for what?" Vance gestured to the main screen. A high-resolution scan of the asteroid belt appeared. Buried deep within a massive, hollowed-out asteroid was a structure. It was not Xylanthi. It was not Imperial. It was organic, a writhing, frozen mass of black tendrils and biological metal, dormant but emitting a faint, rhythmic pulse. "That," Vance said, pointing to the horror, "is a dormant hive seed. We've fought them before on the Galactic Rim. The Scourge. They consume organic matter, strip worlds bare, and move on. They are attracted to high-energy civilizations. The Imperium knew it was here. They knew it was waking up." "So they trapped us here?" Thalker whispered, the realization dawning with horrific clarity. "To feed it." "They used your civilization as a distraction," Vance confirmed, his fists clenched. "They locked the door, hoping the Scourge would feast on you and stay contained in this system, or at least be delayed while the Imperium fled to the core worlds. You were the sacrifice." The revelation shattered the last remnants of Xylanthi reverence for their old masters. They had not been abandoned, they had been murdered. But with the horror came a new fear. "If it is waking up," Kale said, stepping forward, his voice steady for the first time in years, "then we are already dead. The Scourge cannot be fought. The legends speak of them, the World Eaters." "We don't believe in unwinnable fights," Vance said, turning to face the alien bridge crew. "And we don't run. The Endurance and the rest of the 7th Fleet are not just relief ships. We are war hulks. We have been hunting the Scourge for 50 years. "You hunt them?" Thalker stared at the small, soft human. "You hunt the nightmare." "We are the nightmare to them," Vance smiled, a baring of teeth that looked predatory. "Preparation for combat. Alert the fleet. We're going to wake it up, and then we're going to kill it." The transition from relief operation to war footing was instantaneous. The human ships, previously engaged in transport and repair, transformed. Panels slid back to reveal missile batteries. Heavy railguns extended from the hulls. Drone swarms were reprogrammed from repair protocols to interceptor patterns. The Xylanthi, inspired by the humans' terrifying confidence, mobilized their own meager forces. They had few ships, but they had rage. They stripped the mining lasers from their industrial platforms and mounted them on shuttles. They armed themselves with plasma cutters and ancient ceremonial weapons. The plan was simple and insane. The humans would lure the hive seed out of the asteroid belt by simulating a massive energy spike, a dinner bell. When it emerged, the fleet would hammer it with everything they had. The battle began in the silence of the void. The energy spike was deployed. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the asteroid shattered. The hive seed erupted, a monstrosity of biology and geometry, a flower of death blooming in the dark. It was the size of a moon, surrounded by a cloud of millions of interceptor organisms. It shrieked across the electromagnetic spectrum, a psychic scream that made the Xylanthi weep in pain. But the humans did not weep. "Fire," Vance ordered. The void lit up. The human fleet unleashed a torrent of kinetic violence that defied description. Railgun slugs the size of buildings slammed into the biological mass. Nuclear-pumped lasers carved trenches into its flesh. The hive seed retaliated, spewing streams of acid and boarding pods. The battle became a chaotic melee. Thalker watched from the bridge of the Endurance, witnessing the ferocity of the human spirit. He saw human fighters weaving through walls of interceptor fire, ramming their broken craft into the enemy when their weapons ran dry. He heard the calm, professional chatter of the captains as they coordinated maneuvers that utilized the gravitational pull of the planet to slingshot their heavy destroyers into firing positions. The Xylanthi fought too. Kale led a squadron of retrofitted mining tugs, dragging a massive net of explosive charges directly into the path of the Scourge's feeder tendrils. They fought not for an empire that had abandoned them, but for the humans who had found them. They fought for the right to exist. The turning point came when the hive seed attempted to launch a spore cloud toward Xylos, a desperate attempt to infect the planet and consume its biomass to heal. "It's targeting the planet," Sato yelled from the engineering station. "Shields are holding, but the spore density is too high." Vance didn't hesitate. Ramming speed, helm, bring the Endurance between the cloud and the planet. "Admiral, the structural integrity won't hold," the helmsman replied, though his hands were already executing the command. "I didn't ask if it would hold. I said put us in the way." The massive human flagship groaned as it turned, its thrusters flaring white-hot. It positioned itself as a shield, a wall of steel between the dying world and the consuming swarm. The spores slammed into the hull, acid eating through armor plating, fires breaking out on multiple decks. But the ship held. It took the blow meant for Xylos. "All batteries concentrate fire on the central eye," Vance commanded, blood running from a cut on his forehead where a console had exploded. "Open the silo doors, deploy the Nova bombs." The Nova bombs, weapons outlawed by the Galactic Council, weapons that the humans had kept for exactly this kind of darkness. Two small, unassuming cylinders shot from the belly of the Endurance, streaking toward the wound in the hive seed's center. The explosion was silent, a blinding sphere of pure fusion that evaporated the center of the entity. The shockwave rattled the teeth of every being in the system. The hive seed convulsed, its biological cohesion failing, and then dissolved into a cloud of burning debris. Silence returned to the bridge of the Endurance. The ship was listing, bleeding atmosphere, its hull scarred and pitted, but the screen showed the debris field. The monster was dead. Thalker looked at Vance, who was slumped in his command chair, breathing heavily. The human looked exhausted, battered, but alive. "You saved us," Thalker said, his voice trembling. "You sacrificed your ship to save a world that is not yours." Vance wiped the blood from his eye. "It is ours now, Archon. We bled for it. That makes us kin." The aftermath of the Battle of Xylos was a time of rebuilding, but this time it was not a desperate scramble for Sue. Arvival, it was the construction of a future. The human coalition repaired their ships in orbit, utilizing the Xylanthi's newly reopened mines. The Xylanthi, no longer isolated, petitioned to join the coalition. They offered their loyalty, their history, and their unique knowledge of stellar navigation. But the true twist, the revelation that would shake the foundations of the galaxy, came during the salvage operations of the hive seed. Human scientists and Xylanthi scholars were analyzing the core of the dead creature. They were looking for its origin, trying to understand where it had come from. Deep within the biological hard drive of the monster, encoded in genetic memory, they found a signal. It was not a command from a hive mind. It was a transmission. Thalker and Vance stood in the laboratory looking at the decoded data. It was a star chart, a map of the galaxy. This creature, the lead scientist explained, her voice shaking. It wasn't wild, it was engineered. Engineered? Vance asked sharply. Look at the genetic markers. Someone built this thing. Someone designed it to hunt specific genetic sequences. The scientist brought up a comparative analysis. The genetic sequences the Scourge was designed to hunt matched the celestial Imperium. Thalker stared at the screen. The Imperium created them. No, the scientist said. The Imperium was running from them, but the Imperium didn't know the truth. The Scourge wasn't an invader. It was a biological weapon created by a precursor species to wipe the slate clean. She zoomed out on the map. The map showed the galaxy, but it also showed something else. A network of signals coming from the dark space between galaxies. A massive, coordinated fleet of unknown origin waiting in the void. The Scourge was just the vanguard, the scout dog sent to flush out the game. They are coming, Vance said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The ones who built the Scourge, they are coming for the Imperium, they are coming for everyone. Thalker felt the old fear rising, the instinct to hide, to despair. But then he looked at Vance. He looked at the humans around him, engineers, soldiers, scientists, who were not looking at the map with fear but with calculation. They were already analyzing the enemy fleet configurations. They were already discussing logistics, supply lines, and alloy tensile strengths. The humans did not despair. When faced with the end of the world, they built a bigger gun. The Imperium ran because they were afraid, Thalker said, a new strength filling his voice. They left us behind to save themselves, but they only delayed the inevitable. Vance nodded. He placed a hand on Thalker's shoulder. We don't run, we don't leave people behind, and we don't bow to ancient gods or cosmic horrors. Vance turned to the comms officer. Send a message to Earth. Authorization 01. Tell them the Great Filter has arrived. Tell them to wake the sleeper fleets. Tell them we have found allies. He looked back at Thalker, a grim smile on his face. We're going to need a lot more railguns. And Archon, I think it's time we paid the Imperium a visit. If they won't protect this galaxy, we will. Thalker looked at the star map, at the approaching darkness, and then at the human beside him. He realized then that the universe was indeed a dark and terrifying forest, full of predators. But for the first time in history, the Xylanthi were not the prey. They were running with the wolves. We are with you, Admiral, Thalker said, until the last star burns out. The camera pulled back through the hull of the ship, past the rebuilding world of Xylos, past the debris of the defeated monster, and out into the vast, starry expanse where the human fleets were gathering, a line of steel and fire against the encroaching night. They were the shield and the sword, the defiance of the entropy, the answer to the silence, and they would never leave anyone behind again.